Aha! This right here is my 2007 Lexus LX 470, aka a 100 series Land Cruiser with a Lexus badge. This vehicle has been featured on my channel before, but honestly it's been, I don't know, probably about a year and a half. It's kind of the behind the scenes warrior of Fun Ahead TV. Taking multiple Porsche engines down to the machine shop to Elon in North Carolina, hauling car trailers to track weekends and autocrosses, parts runner, an all around great vehicle. The 100 series Land Cruiser is, in my opinion, one of the greatest SUVs of all time. Sorry, what? Oh, sorry, this just in. It is, in fact, the greatest SUV of all time. I had been lusting after one of these for such a long time, whether Toyota or Lexus form, but it's a little known secret that the Lexus version of this is actually cheaper than the Toyota. Don't tell anyone. But they're just so beefy and bulky and awesome. They literally do everything super well. They're extremely comfortable. They're surprisingly fun to drive for being a big SUV. They fit a ton of stuff in the back. They're a 3-row SUV. They can haul a lot of weight. They can pull my 7,000-pound car trailer. And above all else, it is absolutely so overbuilt, so bulletproof, reliable. And in fact, this car is about to turn over 263,000 miles on the odometer, and it drives like it's got 10,000 miles on the clock. That being said, it is time to do some major maintenance projects on this vehicle. It's currently the middle of June, and in the very beginning of August, we're going to drive this vehicle from Ohio, where we live, out to Banff, Canada. Yes, we're going to be driving a 263,000 mile vehicle out to the middle of nowhere, Canada, and back for the fun of it. But before we do that, we do need to do some things major maintenance wise to bring this thing up to snuff. Let's get into it. So we've got a lot to do with the Land Cruiser, several major big projects. One of which is basically just one of the major maintenance things that happens every so often on a 2UZ engine, and that is replacing the timing belt. That needs to happen every 90,000 miles. Timing belt and water pump, of course, along with all other associated pulleys, the tensioner and the idler pulley for the timing belt as well. So that's going to be the thing that we're going to begin tackling in today's video. We're also going to be tackling a couple other major things to rejuvenate a lot of the things within the drivetrain. We're going to touch on that more in the next video. But for now, just know we've got a lot of things coming with regards to this vehicle and just making this 263,000 mile sweetheart drive like brand new. And honestly, like I said, it already drives like it has 10,000 freaking miles on it. It's mind-blowing how overbuilt and well-built this vehicle is. But I'm just excited to rejuvenate the things that are showing some age and just get this thing ready to go for many, many, many more years and many hundreds of thousands of miles yet to come. So with that, let's get right into doing the timing belt and water pump on this thing.
Alrighty, now let's take a quick moment to talk about just what a timing belt is and why it's so important. Now, a traditional 4-stroke engine requires the modulation of poppet valves at very precise timing in order to operate. These, of course, are for the intake of air and fuel and for the expulsion of exhaust. This modulation is controlled by the engine's camshaft or camshafts. To ensure proper engine operation, the timing of the camshaft spinning needs to be precisely controlled relative to the crankshaft to ensure these intake and exhaust events happen at the correct timing. Now, there are two primary methods for controlling camshaft timing in modern engines. One is by utilizing a belt to connect the cams to the crank, and the other is by utilizing a chain. Both come with their pros and cons. Timing belt being on the left, pros are that it has much less expensive components, it's reliable within the service life, and all the related parts get refreshed at service timing. The cons are, well, it's got a much more frequent service life than that of the timing chain at about 100,000 miles, 90,000 in the case of this 2UZ Toyota engine. For timing chain, pros are, it lasts a long time. There's no defined service interval, and it is reliable within its service life. But the cons are that timing chains and guides fail with age and mileage, which causes engine timing issues, and it can be very expensive to service when needed, and it's often overlooked until it's too late. Now, the 2UZ utilizes a timing belt. Toyota and Honda have both utilized timing belts in many of their engines for a long time. While they have more frequent service intervals compared to timing chains, the interval provides the opportunity to change a lot of other critical components more frequently, making the engine more reliable in the long run. With the exception of the crank and cam pulleys, every component in this image will be replaced as a part of this service. Just a quick overview. Here are your two cams for each bank. You've got your water pump that's driven by the timing belt in the middle, idler pulleys on either side. The three of these help to maintain a good amount of wrap around each of these cam pulleys. And then the crank pulley, which drives all of this. And of course your tensioner over here, which helps to keep tension on the belt overall.
Today is Wednesday, and on Saturday, I'm taking that car to another autocross about 1 hour away from my home. This week happens to have record heat right now, and Saturday is no exception. The forecast is calling for extremely high temperatures yet again. That car doesn't have air conditioning, plus I don't 100% trust it to drive an hour out and an hour back and then do a race in between those two drives. So ideally I would love to tow it in the trailer with the Land Cruiser, which means that between now and then we need to get the timing belt finished. So clock is a ticking. Let's go ahead and tear into this bad girl and hopefully be able to get this timing belt job done before we actually need to leave in a couple days and tow that thing to another race. Let's get her racked, stacked, slacked, and dacked. You know what I mean? I don't either. Alrighty, now that we've got the old girl up in the air a little bit, it is time to go ahead and zap off this very, very beefcake undercover. Like literally, listen to that. What freaking undercover is that? Just, it is wild. This thing is just so overbuilt, so freaking beefcake, which is exactly why these things can last a million miles. And Toyota famously just cut no corners with these things. As with so many other things I've been talking about on the channel lately, they just don't build them this way anymore. So I'm gonna go ahead and take this thing off, and then we can put her back down and we'll be able to do the majority of the work from the top side. So timing belt wise, we've got a decent bit of room to work here. We're just gonna have to move a few things out of the way, and that should give us, the clearance that we need to be able to get access to the timing belt, which is underneath those black covers right there. Look how clean this engine is. I mean, this entire engine bay, sure, there's a little bit of like surface rust, but there's no oil. For the most part, I mean, this thing is just absolutely spotless. It's honestly very hard to believe that this thing has 263,000 miles on the clock. Pretty wild when you consider that most vehicles don't even ever see that kind of mileage, and this thing is like in its infancy. We're doing major maintenance on it so that it can continue to go even further. All right, I'm gonna start getting to taking stuff apart. Just about everything on the accessory belt has to be loosened or removed or moved in some capacity in order to actually gain full access to the timing belt. Let's do it.
Oh la la. Wow. Oh. Wow.
But let me show you where we're at. So as you can see, I've made quite a bit of progress. I removed this is the condenser, but I removed the radiator and the shroud, and then you guys saw me pull the fan out. But now we have so much room. Originally, I was hoping to not have to take the radiator out, but I kind of ended up having to because of clearance for my impact. Heck of a lot easier. So from here, we've got to start, sorry, don't mind this. Sorry, this thing's just kind of like awkwardly in the middle of everything that I'm trying to show you.
But now we're at the point where we can basically just start pulling stuff off. I gotta get this cover off for the passenger side bank timing cover, the thermostat housing. We then will need to work our way down to start removing bolts down here for this guy, and then our tensioner, and then our power steering pump, and our alternator further down there, and our AC compressor.
Literally, like I said, just about everything on the accessory drive, yeah, literally everything has to come loose. But now it is exciting because it is officially time to begin taking the timing belt covers off. All right, deepest apologies because yet again, this AC line slash this wiring harness is right in y'all's way. So this is held on by a handful of bolts here. I'm just gonna go ahead and take those off now.
Oh la la. Wow. Oh.
Was that the last one or is there another one? Oh, that looks like that was the last one. Boom. So here on this pulley is that mark, and then here on the casting of the valve cover is the top dead center mark. And in order to get the engine totally at top dead center, we're gonna have to line up these two marks. So looks like it is just past top dead center right now because the engine actually turns to the right. When you're looking at it, it turns clockwise. So we will have to turn the crankshaft almost 2 full rotations in order to get this cam to be at top dead center. One thing that's kind of swaggy about these is they are dual cam engines, but they only obviously have one sprocket that drives the cams. They're actually geared underneath here, so this intake cam spins this way and then it gears to the exhaust cam and that spins the opposite direction. In a lot of dual overhead cam engines that have timing belts, the timing belt drives both of them, but in this case, the timing belt only drives one of them and a gear drives the other one. Kind of sweet. All right, well, I'm gonna go ahead and take off this timing belt cover as well, probably this one too, just to get as much access as we possibly can. Then we'll go ahead and put her in top dead center. So I'm gonna pick up once I've kind of done all that. Obviously, you're not missing much. So I got the other cover off of the driver's side cylinder bank. As you can see, we have both cam pulleys exposed now.
Wow!
I mentioned that this mark right here is the top dead center mark. That's the true indicator. That is true. However, there's also this T mark right here, and you can see that I actually have the engine lined up with that T mark. And I know what you're wondering, David, what the heck is that T mark? Well, as we know, valves have pressure that push back on the cams, and at that true top dead center, apparently there is some amount of pressure pushing back up into the camshafts, and it can potentially, once you remove the timing belt, move the cams just so, and then actually cause a piston valve collision, potentially. So what is the T? It's an actual safe space for you to be able to have the cams and the crank disconnected with one another without the risk of having a valve to piston collision. And as you can see, this is lined up with the T right here, and then down there is a little silver pole stud thing that's sticking out that my crank is aligned up to, and you can see the mark on the crank down there. If you were to truly have this engine in top dead center, you would have that little mark there lined up with the 0 on the engine block there. Again, I've never done one of these before, but this is what people say is the correct orientation to have your engine in order to remove the timing belt. Then again, a ton of people are also like, it really doesn't matter. You can easily put your engine in the top dead center orientation and have it be just fine as well. Nonetheless, I'm going to go ahead and do it aligned with the T just to be safe and make sure that we truly don't have a piston valve collision. Last thing I'd want to do is bend a valve and have to pull a cylinder head. That would suck. Also, I had mentioned previously that we need to remove just about everything in order to get access to this stuff. So the reason is, at least on this side of the engine, we need to get this tensioner off. Well, in order to get this tensioner off, we need to get access to that stud right there. So basically you have to have the alternator out of the way. In order to have the alternator out of the way, you have to have the power steering pump out of the way. So we need to remove this, then this can go free. And then that opens up a huge amount of access on this side of the engine. All right, well, I'm gonna get to removing more stuff. Time's a-wasting.
A few minutes later.
Ugh. I realized why we need to loosen the AC compressor. Let me show you. So, what I've learned in taking all this stuff apart is that all of this stuff is interconnected with one another. Like I said, this is the mount for the alternator, which is the mount for the power steering pump. So that's why I have both of these disconnected now, as you can see. But this bracket right here that holds the radiator fan is also the bracket that holds the bolt holes for the AC compressor mount. That makes a lot of sense now. So therefore, in order to remove that bracket, we need to have the AC compressor at least kind of moved over. So the reason I'm complaining about the AC compressor is because, quite honestly, that thing is a total pain in the butt to get to. All 3 bolts, kind of a pain. Well, front 2 aren't too bad, but the back one is a huge pain in the butt. I know that because I replaced the AC compressor right after I bought this vehicle. Says the guy who works on Porsches all the time, that was a pain in the butt job. But that being said, this honestly, as far as the timing belt job goes, this is like the first step in the entire process where I'm like, why the heck did Toyota do it that way? Everything else isn't that bad. I mean, yeah, we're taking off a lot of stuff, but it's not awful. It's honestly like pretty simple, straightforward stuff. And check this out. All of the tools that I have used to get this far so far, those tools and those tools. So few tools. If I'm working on my 911, which quite honestly is a fairly simple car to work on as far as German cars go, I would have had 50 tools out by now. Toyota honestly really thought everything out as far as like working on these vehicles goes. And in the meantime, they made them just solid as rocks. Okay, well at this point, I'm procrastinating. I really don't want to take that AC compressor off, but I'm gonna go ahead and start wrestling with that bad boy. Once we get that off, we will have full access to the entire front of the engine and therefore the entire timing belt. Status update time. I've made some progress and it feels good. I did end up going ahead and getting those 2 bolts out of the AC compressor. Just the front 2, didn't end up doing the rears. There is this teeny tiny little bracket. It's just an aluminum little bracket and I bent it out of the way. That was actually preventing this entire thing from sliding off of this post because this kind of goes in its way, but we'll just nicely bend that back in place once we get everything put back together. Not that big of a risk for quite a solid reward of time savings. And honestly, what the heck does that bracket even do? So I'm still having the internal struggle of the TDC mark versus the T mark, and Toyota experts, feel free to chime in. Let me know down in the comments. I am going to use the T mark because from everything that I'm reading, it seems like that is the mark that is the most safe as far as making sure that no spring tension within the valve train is going to push the cams one way or the other. And that sounds all fine and great, but there is in fact a catch to doing that. Let me show you that now. So as you can see down here, I've removed the harmonic balancer. So note, we are in the TDC orientation right now. Once you come down here, you can see that there's a little notch on the actual crank pulley for the timing belt, and then there's a little dot on the case there that aligns up with once the crank is in engine top dead center. No problems there. However, there isn't a secondary mark for the T orientation. So what I've done is gone ahead and put my little Sharpie mark, as you can see right here, and that Sharpie mark indicates where the crank position is relative to that dot on the case when the cams are at the T mark. Does all that make sense? Hopefully that makes sense. It's time to go ahead, turn everything into the T position, and remove our timing belt. Boom, dead nuts nutty. And then we're gonna go ahead and take our light, make sure that we can see that our Sharpie mark is aligned up. Yes, and it is. So just really quickly, one really nice thing about doing any timing belt job is look at the fidelity of these belts, right? Look how far apart these teeth are. So it'll be very obvious if we're off by an entire tooth anywhere in this entire process. It's not like you have super like granular teeth to where it's like, are you off by like half a little degree? No. Like an entire tooth will be a glaring difference. So okay, one last time. Passenger side cam at the T. Driver side cam at the T. Crankshaft at our Sharpie mark. We are officially lined up, all good to go. Let's go ahead and get our belt off of here. All right, an old trick that I learned from a buddy Garrick, who is a master tech on Hondas, is you don't bother with taking the tensioner off, you just cut them. And I'm gonna go ahead and assume that same rule applies for Toyotas as well. So I'm just gonna cut this. Also, I'm being very careful as I'm removing this to not move my crank or either of the cams. That would be bad. Okay, timing belt is off. Let's go ahead and double check our placement. That cam still at the T. This cam still at the T. Crank, yep, our Sharpie mark is still pointing directly at our mark on the case. Nothing has moved. Awesome. We are exactly halfway, with the exception of we still need to take the water pump off, of course, and the old timing belt pulleys. But hey, I say we're just about halfway done because the old timing belt is off, and there it sits. We're officially at halfway. Let's give a quick update. Looking down here, as you can see, whoops, sorry, we got this ding ding. This is just the theme of this entire video. Are these hoses directly in the middle of the frame? Yes. Okay. 28 minutes of that, go. Anyway, I just got the water pump off. Just so you know, it does, have quite a few varying bolts. And then once you get them off, there is this little transfer tube right back here that the water pump actually seats onto, and there's a little O-ring. You can see the little groove for that O-ring right there. So because of that interference, it does require just a tiny bit of prying, minor pressure with the pry bar, and then that backs your water pump off once you get all the bolts off. And then of course, before that, I went ahead and I took off our tensioner pulley and then our idler pulley as well. We are officially at the halfway point. Let's go ahead and do a quick analysis of the primary parts that we just took off. Not everything, of course. I mean, that would take a year and 4 months. I'm talking about the things that we're replacing. Timing belt, water pump. Let's go ahead and start out with let's do the timing belt first. Overall, this thing was definitely in solid shape. You can see that there was no cracking whatsoever with this. There's a little bit of shininess going on the back of it, but no signs of extreme wear. This thing obviously would have gone a lot longer. And in typical Toyota fashion, they say 90,000 miles. That thing could easily do 120, call it, probably. There are several things at play here other than the timing belt that could possibly fail. If either one of your idlers were to fail, or if the bearing for the water pump were to fail, then obviously your timing belt is no longer keeping things in time, and then things jump timing. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4, well, counting the tensioner as well, 5 things at play here that could potentially fail anytime within those 90,000 miles. That would then cause your interference engine to smack valves on pistons. So on that note, let's go ahead and take a quick peek at the bearings for the tensioner pulley here. And this thing's not making any weird noise, and there's no play in this bearing. So I would say that pulley had a lot of life left in it. Let's look at the idler really quickly. This one's making a little bit of noise, but I mean, there's a tiny bit of play in it. So, whatever. It was at 85,000 miles. Obviously, there's a reason for that interval. As far as the tensioner goes, we're not going to be able to tell, but the main tell with those, at least for Hondas, is if they start leaking oil. And that one was not leaking oil, so I think that one had some life left in it. Lastly, let's go ahead and take a quick peek at the water pump. Now this to me was a little bit concerning because, I don't know if you can hear this, I'm going to put it up to my mic. Do you hear that like metallic clanking? So this bearing has play in it. And then when you spin this, listen. You can hear that. It's good that we're replacing this now because there was definitely some play in that bearing. Granted, again, same with all this stuff, it would have gone for quite a bit longer. Nonetheless, it's good to get it out of there and refreshed, especially for such a critical system. Well, good morning. It is now the next day, and it is in fact not the morning because yet again, getting caught up with a bunch of other whatnot, and it is now 1:15 in the afternoon, and we are getting started on working on the Land Cruiser for the day. Was I hoping to get started at like 9 in the morning? Yep. Did I? Nope. First things first, let's go ahead and look at all the newness that we're gonna go ahead and throw back on the front of this engine. All right, here is our newness. Let's go ahead and take a look at what we got. First of all, this is the Import Direct kit from O'Reilly's. They do timing belt and water pump kits for a lot of different cars. Their Honda kits are awesome. They come highly recommended by a lot of very good mechanics that work on those cars regularly. So therefore I trusted the Toyota kit as well, figuring that it would be just as good, and so far, so good. So basically this uses the Gates brand hardware, and which is, for the most part, pretty solid stuff. We got our new timing belt here. That's what this looks like. Freshy McFresh fresh, nice. This is our new hydraulic tensioner with the grenade pen in it, nice. We'll talk about that more once we install that. Whoops. This kit also comes with the brand new water pump. Like I said, she's fresh, she's tight, feels super good, spins nicely as well. Also, we have a new idler, and we have a new tensioner pulley, fresh, and then it also comes with gaskets and hardware as well. So anyway, obviously a pretty comprehensive kit. We have everything that we need that could possibly go wrong. Obviously it's smart to just go ahead and rejuvenate everything having to do with that, just so that you don't have some sort of very unwanted failure. When in doubt, replace all of the while you're in there's. Speaking of while you're in there's, let me go show you something that I decided I was gonna go ahead and do. On the floor here, you can see I've got a brand new alternator and a battery as well. Yes, I gave in. I am just, if you've been watching the channel for a while, you know I am a sucker for the while you're in there's. We already had to have the alternator off to get to all of the timing components. It was just hanging there, and I'm like, look, I don't know when it was done. It looks kind of old. This car's got 263,000 miles on it. Additionally, if you replace your alternator, you should replace the battery as well if it's an older one, and mine was 6 years old. You know me, Mr. While You're In There. We're doing while you're in there. Enough talking. We've got all of our new components. We've got our new battery and alternator. Let's go ahead and start slapping this stuff together, shall we? Alrighty, so let me show you what I just did. I spent a few minutes just cleaning everything up. As you can see, I got this area nice and cleaned off where this is where the tensioner goes for the timing belt. I scraped off this surface for the water pump really nicely with a carbide blade. So it is time to begin installing the water pump. That is the big first step. Once we get the water pump on, then we can go ahead and put our brand new idler and tensioner pulleys on, and then it'll be timing belt time. Ladies and gentlemen, the time has come. Well, as you saw, I just put on the water pump, nice and freshly installed. The correct spec I think is 13 foot-pounds, but I put them all to 15 because what's 2 foot-pounds? And then I went ahead and put the tensioner pulley and idler pulley for the timing belt on. Each of those goes to 29 foot-pounds. One thing to note, by the way, there's this little plate that fits right in here that literally just like sets in there. I can take that out. See, it goes between the water pump and then the oil pump. That is part of the timing belt casing. So obviously it protects the timing belt to some extent. So just make sure that that makes its way back onto the car.
Many, many minutes later.
Whoo! That was stressful. And for some reason, I didn't put a time lapse on, and I'm genuinely sorry. I don't know why I didn't do that. But I will do my best to talk through what just happened. Well, as you can see, I have the new timing belt up in place. It's not tensioned down yet because our tensioner, even though it is up in place, I haven't pulled the old grenade pin out of it yet. So first of all, these are quite a bit different than Honda timing belts. There's a little bit less wiggle room. Honda ones are pretty easy, and same with the 944. Remember when we did the 944 one a couple months ago? You start at the crank, and then you get it nice and taut on the tension side. You kind of work up and around. You go up around your first camshaft, or your only camshaft as it were, and it's not all that bad. Well, when you look at this cam sprocket right here, this has a lip on it, so you can't start at the crank and then work up and around because it won't, if you have enough tension in it, it won't let you get up and around that sprocket. So therefore, the way I did it was I started at the left side cam and then worked down to the crank just to establish my tension between these two. But because it is just so and absolutely perfect lengthwise between, for the belt length between these two sprockets, even when the belt's at a slight angle, you don't have enough room to actually slip this up and over to be the correct number of teeth away. Does that make sense? So therefore you need to actually take a 19mm wrench and turn this sprocket out of the T position by just a half tooth. And that half tooth is exactly the amount of rotational distance that you need to be able to get that belt on there. Once you get that on, all good and happy, but then that keeps wanting to fly off the sprocket when you're trying to put the right side one on. So you have to be very intentional for holding this down on the teeth as you're working this one up and around, which you also have to turn about a half a tooth this way in order to get it onto the sprocket. So I learned also the hard way that just past a half tooth, there's a spring point where this sprocket wants to start moving. So we're gonna start the car and it'll either be fine or we're gonna have a bent valve. No, actually, I don't think we're gonna have a bent valve. You bend valves when you're running at 2,000 RPMs and you start smacking valves. I feel like it would have been very hard for us to bend a valve just sitting here. Possible, but highly unlikely. So let me go torque down this tensioner real quick, and then we can do the big grenade pen pull. Yes, I'm excited. Hopefully you are too. And then our belt will be officially under tension, and we can do the 720 check. Well, all right, I went ahead and torqued down our tensioner, these two bolts down here, to 15 foot-pounds, which I believe is the correct spec. On the note of clearance and installability of this timing belt, they do say to install it without the tensioner in place. Mind you, our grenade pin is still in place here, so the tensioner isn't even released, and it has put so much tension on this belt right here. It would have been literally impossible to install. Anyway, it is time to pull our pen. Who's excited? Hit the like button if you're excited. Let's go ahead and do this thing. Well, I gotta say that was pretty anticlimactic. Well, folks, it's officially time to do our 720 check. So, before turning, let's look. Right side is at the T. Left side is at the T. Crank is at our mark that I made on the crank, and that lines up with the little dimple on the crankcase. Let's go ahead and give her a turn. Well, folks, that was 720 degrees of rotation of the crank. Let's take a quick look and see how we did. So, right side camshaft, boom, lined up on the mark. Left side camshaft, boom, lined up on the mark. Hopefully you can see that, boom. And crank, yes, lined up. And of course, this time we're not lined up at the T, we are truly at the top dead center mark. Success, baby. Another successful 720 degree check in the books. So, now we just need to go ahead and put everything back together. Really, really, really hoping now that I didn't forget something that needed to go on before the timing belt went on. If I did, that would absolutely just freaking ruin my day. Yeah, all right, well, installation is reverse of removal. Let's go ahead and do some installation. Well, hi there. Cheers.
Fresh fire!
It is now, yet again, the next day.
And the next day, and the next day.
We're in the home stretch before actually starting the engine up and bleeding the coolant system, and then actually just taking this thing for a little test spin. So as you guys saw in the time lapse, I got basically everything up to the radiator and shroud reinstalled. All the hoses are plugged into the radiator, and everything on the front end, accessory-wise, is reinstalled and should be good to go. What we have yet to do, of course, is put our intake back in place, get all that good to go, and of course we need to throw our brand new battery in. From there, of course, we will go ahead and top up the coolant and get it to at least, where we can start the engine, and then we will begin the bleeding procedure from there. So I'm gonna go ahead and throw on that intake and throw this battery in, and then we'll pick up once it is ready to start. Well, we got the battery in, which ended up being a freaking ordeal. I'll explain that in a second. And then also we have the intake on. Boom, we are officially ready to put coolant in this bad girl, which, by the way, if you don't have one of these bad units, definitely get yourself one. Obviously, it's very essential for this particular style of cooling system because it doesn't have an integrated expansion tank into it. It only has the overflow tank. So you can't fill it from this tank. You have to fill it from the fill cap on the radiator. Therefore, this is 1000% essential. I'll show you more how that works in just a minute here. Let me tell you about this battery saga. So it's always the little things, right? I'm like, okay, I'm gonna throw the battery on real quick, super easy. I had the hardware for the bracket sitting right here, and you know what happened next. I bumped it, it fell down somewhere, and I spent the next 20 minutes poking around with my magnet trying to find it. Didn't find it. Fortunately, I did have a bolt in the old spare bolts bin that worked for this particular application, but why is it that that's always just the case? You're always like, oh, I'm just gonna do this thing real quick, and then something happens, and then you're like, 20, 25 minutes later, you're like, okay, finally, the thing that was supposed to take 2 freaking seconds. Let's fill this thing up with coolant, shall we? Okay, everybody, big moment of truth here. We need to check and see if we're going to have any fluid leaks. I'm a little bit worried because the thermostat housing manifold thing was a little bit buggered up. They actually, whoever installed the timing belt and water pump last time didn't actually put a gasket back in place. They just put RTV. And I was like, oh, that's why they put RTV. But then I looked at the mating surface on that little manifold, and it was, someone clearly used like some kind of a grinder to get old gasket material off it at some point. Anyway, point being, I'm a little bit worried about it. I ended up using a little bit of RTV. If it doesn't seal, we're gonna have to take some stuff back apart, and this is it, the moment of truth. Time to put coolant in this thing. First of all, let me show you, since I mentioned it, let me show you how this thing works. Fill it up basically until you get coolant back in your funnel, and then you start the engine. That way you always have a source of fill coolant so that when the thermostat eventually opens and then the whole coolant system starts drawing in the rest of the coolant from the radiator, and this level inevitably drops, you don't have to be right here with the thing ready to go. It'll just supply the coolant. And then once you're done, you take the plug, because of course it's gonna be full of hot coolant, and then you just go bloop, bloop, and it's done. Pretty nifty. This is like an OEM tools kit, I think. You can get it like AutoZone. And it comes with every possible adapter for any kind of, radiator fitting sizes. Now, of course, to fill this bad girl, we're not just going back in with any regular OEM coolant. We are using Redline Super Cool coolant. This is coolant that has their water wetter pre-mixed into it. And if you don't know what Redline's water wetter is, basically allows for better heat transfer between metallic parts to your water. You, on average, run several degrees cooler, but I've been using Redline products for years and years. I've used their water wetter in a handful of my vehicles, and it is impressive how good of a job it does. And of course, in the case of this vehicle, this is my do-it-all, do-everything vehicle, and it's my tow rig. Keeping this engine cool is essential, especially on a hot, late June day like it is today, where it's in the mid-90s. And tomorrow, in fact, like I said, we're going to pull that 944 right over there to an autocross event about an hour away. And the forecast is calling for a high in the mid-90s. So we need the good stuff to keep us cool. So do me a favor, go check out their website. They have products for literally anything. Any kind of, engine oil to gear oil to ATF to brake fluid to oil for your snowmobile to your motorcycle to your dirt bike to your ATV to your side-by-side. You name it, they've got it. Go check out their website. And like I said, I'm not just saying this because they're sponsoring this video. They truly have the best stuff. I've been using it for years in every single one of my cars. Additionally, as I'm filling this car up with the coolant infused with water wetter, for a limited time, buy any Fun Ahead TV t-shirt or hoodie. I will include a free bottle of water wetter in 3 random orders. Jump on that opportunity because it's not gonna last long. You get to try it out yourself in your very own car. So I'm gonna keep filling this thing up with coolant, let it get fully topped up, and then it'll be time for the first test fire. Let's get to it. Here it is, everybody. Here it is. As you can see, I've got the entire system filled up with coolant, and we have coolant about halfway or about a third of the way up our funnel, because as we start the engine and run it, the coolant is going to get hot in the system and it's going to expand. So the last thing you want is to overfill this before it actually sucks the coolant down in, and then you have coolant, hot coolant, mind you, just overflowing onto your shop floor. By the way, this radiator is so freaking thick, like thick with about 7.5 Cs. I think this radiator itself holds several gallons. It is enormous. Again, another testament to how overbuilt these trucks are. I'm gonna go ahead and give her the very first ever test fire. I think I tightened everything down, but we're about to find out. Let's just do a real quick fire, just like a, okay, it's good, and then shut it off. And then I'll pop the garage door, and then we can do the full coolant bleeding process, assuming everything looks and sounds okay. I hope I tightened everything down. Well, she fired right up. Drama free. And our alternator's charging, so that's good. Heck yeah. Successful first start, I would say. Are we dripping any coolant anywhere yet? Seems like so far no. Okay, well, I'm gonna go ahead and pop the garage door open. Let's get to bleeding this system. Let me bring you guys in here so you can see. Alrighty, so of course we just fired it up, so she is ice cold, but nothing, nothing out of the ordinary. Everything looks and sounds great so far. These engines are insanely just well balanced and quiet. In fact, I'm just like touching the intake manifold here, and like I don't think I would really know that this engine is running just by touching that intake manifold. That's how well balanced these engines are. Absolutely wild. Okay, so again, right there is that thermostat housing slash manifold, and you can kind of see the RTV up around it that I just put on to help the gasket out, because like I said, that mating surface was pretty warped. So far, it does not appear like we've got any amount of coolant dripping from it. Hopefully it stays that way. And obviously, since our funnel is full of coolant, that does mean that coolant has made its way down this pipe right into that area. So there's definitely coolant on the back side of that. Okay, well, I am just going to let this thing run for a while. That's gonna be pretty boring. It needs to get up to temperature and open the thermostat, and then we can add coolant on top of it to fully bleed the system. Oh, dang it, and one thing I forgot to mention, in order to bleed the coolant properly, you have to put the HVAC up to high heat so that the coolant is routed through the heater core. Otherwise, you know, you're not going to be fully flowing coolant through every single item in the circuit. Well, your boy just got done bleeding the old cooling system. Took about 20 minutes of just consistent, basically holding her between 1,500 to 3,000 RPMs, getting everything nice and hot, getting that coolant real nice and circulated through the engine. In the end, we got a nice, good bleed. Anyway, I threw the engine cover on, I threw that undercover on. It is officially time for the first test drive with this new timing belt and water pump. It's like the kids say, let us go. I'm so freaking old. Well, all right, and we are off. We're currently doing 55 miles an hour, and we have not yet blown up the engine. Everything is going smoothly so far. Temperatures are looking great. Oil pressure's looking great. Voltage is looking great. It's indicative of our new alternator working swimmingly and charging our brand new battery up nicely. So where are we headed on this maiden voyage, you might ask? Well, in typical Land Cruiser owner fashion, we are going to none other than the nearest gas station. Yes, that's right. When this car gets 15 mpgs on average on the highway, you make a lot of fuel stops. That is honestly the only downside about this vehicle. It literally excels at absolutely everything. You cannot ding it for a single thing. Sure, you can ding it for not being able to like set a record time around a racetrack. Obviously, it's not that kind of vehicle, but it is just an absolute workhorse and is so good at just being a sport utility vehicle. But anyway, so far so good. I still have not put my tools away though in the shop. As many of my long-term viewers will know, I never put my tools away after a big job until I come back from the first test drive successfully and without any breakdowns. I feel like putting your tools away is just asking for having something break on that test drive. So there they sit in the shop until we get back home. What's up? Alrighty, let's just go ahead and check and see how we did really quickly. So far, I know you guys probably can't see much because it's pretty dark down in there, but so far, I don't see any leaks and I'm not seeing anything come out of the bottom. Let's double check. That's AC, by the way, that's not coolant. Boom. I would say first successful test drive in the books. We have just finished the timing belt and water pump on this bad girl. That is one of the big items that we needed to check off our list before going on our cross-country, multi-country road trip up into Banff, Canada in just a month and a half. Even though it took us multiple days to do it, because we only had a couple hours per day to work on this thing, we can, in fact, use this thing to tow the 944 to the autocross that we need to go to tomorrow, as opposed to just driving this thing with no AC 1 hour away in 95-degree temperatures and then standing outside all day. So we'll have a comfortable air-conditioned SUV that can pull the car, and we'll also have a big trailer to hang out in for shade during the event. Alrighty, well, we have so many more things yet to come for Project Cruisin' for a Bruisin'. Like I said, this was only the tip of the iceberg. albeit it was a very big item that we needed to check off the list before going on our cross-country road trip, but we have many, many more things yet to come. If you liked this video, please do me a huge favor and hit that like button. It helps out my channel immensely. And please subscribe if you want to see even more stuff having to do with this Land Cruiser, because we've got an entire series coming your way. And while you're at it, hit the bell just so you get notified the second those videos go live. So thank you all so much for being here. I appreciate each and every one of you. Yes, you, I'm looking right at you. And I will see you all in the next video. See ya.
Thanks so much for watching that video. If you want to see even more great Funhead TV content, please click the link right here. I'll see you over there.